Today on Better Book Clubs, my reading goals for 2021. Happy New Year, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about my reading goals for 2021. I'm putting that in quotation marks because I've just been talking in a number of my recent videos about the fact that setting goals is something that I'm kind of getting away from this year. For the last 10 years, I've set myself a reading goal on Goodreads of reading at least 30 books a year. For some people that may not sound like very much, but for me that was it was an attainable goal, but one that was challenging, and I didn't meet it every year. I did meet it in 2020, but I'm not that interested in the number of books I'm going to read in 2021. Although it doesn't really change my reading habits over the course of the year. Around the end of the year, the last 6 weeks or so, I do start to get preoccupied with, am I going to meet that goal? And I do things like try to find a shorter book to read, or find a book that I left half read and get back to it. And I just don't really care, honestly, how many books I'm reading. But I do care about the kinds of books I'm reading. And so I thought that this year instead, this coming year, I would set myself a goal of reading certain types of books. This is a very attainable goal, and it's not one that I feel like I have to meet, but it's more a guideline, I guess, especially for those times when I might I finish one thing and not just be sure. I usually wander around for a few days after I finish a book trying to figure out what I want to read next. And so I think these guidelines might be a good reminder to me of the kinds of books that I want to be reading, the diversity of books that I want to be reading. And so I thought I would share with you what my goals are, my guidelines are for 2021, because maybe you would like to try something similar. So the first type of book that I want to read in 2021 is a type of book that I've read pretty much every year, and that is at least one classic that I haven't read before. And I've mentioned in some other videos that I often like to read, well, not often, but I sometimes like to read with a group on Goodreads called Classics and the Western Canon, because that's a really smart, interesting group of people, and they help me read classics that I probably just would struggle to read on my own, just feel like less motivation to read if I'm reading by myself. So I don't know what that classic book might be this year. I always pay attention to the books that they're choosing, and when they choose one that I'm really interested in, I'll jump in and read with them. So it's possible that that classic will be something I'm going to read with them. And how I define classic, we'll see what I come up with, but that's definitely one category that I'm usually reading in anyway every year, but I just want to remember to try a new classic that I haven't tried before. The second kind of book I want to read this year is at least one history. I find that I've been reading more nonfiction in the last few years, which is kind of interesting. I didn't used to enjoy reading nonfiction at all, but I'm really interested in history, and particularly American history. There are tons of great books out there about American history. Again, I don't really know what the history book will be, and I'll probably read more than one, but that's something else I'm going to watch for this year. And maybe it won't be American history. Maybe I'll branch out a little bit and try something else. I also want to read a biography this year. I've read a few biographies recently. I mentioned actually an autobiography in my reading roundup for 2020 by Sylvia Beach, and I would love to read her biography as well. I know there's a biography out there about her. So that might be the biography that I choose. Again, there might be more than one biography. I don't know what else might come across my path, but biography I find really interesting because you often learn not just about that person's life, but you often learn things about how people succeed, or how they handle failure, or how they lead. You can learn a lot about yourself actually from reading biography, and about your own life, and about decisions that you've made. And I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoy biography. It can be kind of a psychological pursuit. I do want to read at least one book that everybody's talking about this year, because it's nice to be in on the larger conversation. So I find that often, because I have such an eclectic taste in reading, and because I read for work and for pleasure, and because I have such a big stack of books that are older, meaning, from last year or before, that I haven't gotten to yet, I'm rarely reading the thing that everybody's talking about while they're talking about it. I want to jump into that conversation in 2021. I don't know, none of us know yet what that book is or what those books are that everybody's going to be talking about. But it's really fun to be reading them while that conversation is happening. So at least one of the books I read this coming year, I want it to be that book that I can have that current conversation with other people about. I also want to reread at least one book this year and see how it's different this time around. There are some books that I've read over and over and over again because I teach, and while I don't always read them cover to cover every time, if they're books that I've taught many times, I do find that when the first few times through, as I reread them, I see new things. If they're good books, if they're well written, if they're substantive, I find something new every time I read them. And of course, that happens also if a long period of time has passed between the last time you read something and then you sit down with it again and you're at a different place in your life, you're interested in different things, you notice different things. And so I think at least one of the books I read this year, I would like to be a reread of something, preferably not just for teaching because I have to reread it, but something that I haven't read in a long time that I want to return to and read again. I know that I have a copy of Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles sitting in my big pile, and I haven't read that since I was a teenager. I know I loved it at the time. I'm not sure I'm going to love it so much this time. I'm really curious to reread it. I really like Hardy, so I think I'm going to enjoy it to some extent, but maybe not in the same way that I enjoyed it when I was much younger. So that might be the book that I reread this year, but again, who knows? We'll see. I also want to read one prize-winning novel from 2020. In 2021. Sometimes those books end up being the ones that everybody's talking about, but a lot of those books end up kind of quietly, disappearing. So, maybe they get a big burst around the time that the prize is announced, or maybe it's a smaller prize and they don't even get much of a boost. They don't become the book that everybody's talking about. But there are so many amazing books out there that are not just prize winners, but also nominees. That's another good way to find good books to read. So I'm just going to take a look at the different book prizes that I know about and pick one of those prize winners to read this year. Because, one of the great things about that is that that there are a number of really great readers who together have chosen that book as a book that's really excellent. And so it's a great way to find books that, you may not love them as enjoyable reads necessarily, but that they're going to be interesting and perhaps challenging in some way. That's another thing that's on my list of guidelines for 2021. Finally, I have this is really a goal, I guess, not just a guideline. I have a goal of reading David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest this year. Now, this book is 981 pages long with an additional almost 100 pages of footnotes at the end. So this is a daunting task, and I hope it won't be a task too much, but maybe it will. I have no idea whether I'm going to enjoy this. I know that I really like David Foster Wallace's essays. I've read a number of them. I really love his essay on 9/11 in particular, but I've never really had the courage to take on this book. So my husband has a copy and I have a copy, and we've decided we're going to read it together because that way I have somebody to talk about it with. I would never read this by myself, I don't think. It's funny because we've also talked to a number of friends and said, hey, we're going to read Infinite Jest this winter. It's kind of like a winter reading project. Do you guys want to do it with us? And so far, everybody's like, oh, Infinite Jest. I have a copy of that. I mean, like several people have said to us, oh yeah, I have it on the shelf, but I've never actually read it. No, I think I'll pass. So I don't know, we're going to get at them and see if we can convince somebody else to take this on with us. We're going to give you some additional videos besides my Wednesday regular videos to keep you posted on how we're doing with Infinite Jest. And so if you would like to join us on our reading of Infinite Jest, keep an eye out for our updates on the book. We would love to have a conversation with you about your reading of it and what you think about it. We'll have the comments section open and jump right in because we can have our own little Infinite Jest book club. So those are my guidelines for reading for 2021. I'd really be interested in hearing if you have some other categories that you would suggest for 2021 reading. Leave them in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying these videos, and I'll be back soon with another episode of Better Book Clubs.